Hello and welcome back to World of Tanks. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Tier 8 British tank destroyer, the Charioteer. I'm going to be telling you why I think this tank is really underrated. So, we're going to start off with looking at some gameplay where I'll talk about some of this tank statistics and strengths and weaknesses, and then I'll recommend equipment and field mods that you should take on this tank. Let's get right into it. So, let's have a look at the gameplay for the Charioteer. We're going to be on cliff, and we're going to be playing it like a traditional tank destroyer. The Charioteer is British, it's part of the FE4005 line of tank destroyers, so it is by nature lightly armoured. It doesn't have any armour, it is paper thin. So, you very much do want to be aware of that, but it doesn't hold this tank back. The strengths of this tank lies in its gun. This thing has a 390 alpha gun that hits pretty accurately. It's got 0.34 dispersion base, which obviously if you use stuff like improved aiming, you can very much increase and it very much becomes a lot more accurate. And you're hitting for 390 alpha with 0.34 dispersion and you have good DPM. This thing has a sub 10-second reload time. It's pretty good. You know, base DPM, 2.4k. It feels so comfy. And not many people expect it to have such good DPM. And that's why I think that this tank is so underrated. Because it's a combination of decent stats that basically combine together to make this tank so good. You know, on the surface, you look at it and you go, oh, it's just a lightly armoured tank destroyer. What can it do? But it's that gun handling, it's that nice alpha, it's that nice DPM. The fact that this thing can go 52 forwards base, so you can take aggressive positions that enemy teams are not going to expect you to be in, and you can use bushes because this thing has really good stationary camo. Even after you fired, you still have 10.5% camo, which is still really high. So this thing just is a combination of not overpowered stats, but good statistics that kind of combine together, and in the right scenario, this thing is just brutal to play against. And, you know, it's already looking really good for this tank, but it has an ace up its sleeve. It has access to HESH ammo. And that HESH ammo is brutal. Like, APCR, this thing has APCR as standard, which is 268mm of pen, which is already really nice. That is, you know, gonna be able to reliably pen every tier 8, and will struggle with some heavy tanks at tier 9. But its HESH has 480 alpha for 210mm of penetration. Yeah. You gain an extra 90 alpha, and you only lose 58mm of penetration. So we're talking about being able to pen the sides of every tier 8 tank, the rear of every tier 8 tank, the rear of most tier 9 and tier 10s. I had a lot of fun playing this tank when I played it, and it's very much influenced my opinion of this tank and as to why I think it's so underrated. Because I marked this tank with exclusively HESH ammo. I free marked it with no other ammunition, didn't fire a single other shot other than HESH. And it was very easy. Because, you know, you just look at tanks like that Super Hellcat. You fire HESH at a Super Hellcat, you're penning every time. There are so many tanks at tier 8 and tier 7 that this thing is going to be meeting a lot. And even at tier 9, that HESH is going to pen, you know, at least 90% of the time. It is just, and it is the most satisfying thing when you pen somebody with HESH. I don't know, it just is. It just feels a lot more satisfying than just hitting them for 390 with APCR. And it is what makes this tank truly underrated. Because not many people, you know, people expect to take 390 alpha. You know, you can intuition to HESH. You know, since we had the crew changes and we got intuition, 100% reliable, this tank has pretty much gave a buff to this tank, that change did, because it can now intuition to HESH in, you know, 1.5 seconds, and instead of hitting for 390 you hit for 480, And that can be the difference between, you know, winning a 1v1 or losing a 1v1. Like, right now, I would be firing Hesh at the side of this ISU because it's a guaranteed pen. And instead of hitting for 416, you're going to be hitting for, you know, 480. It's just, I don't know. It just feels so much more comfy. And as I was saying at the start, it's the combination of this tank statistics that really do make it so good. You know, when you're running a gun rammer on this thing, and, you know, you're running a gun rammer, maybe even vents on this thing, you can get this thing's DPM up to, you know, almost 2.8k at tier 8 in a tank destroyer that has camo, is quick, has decent gun handling. Yeah. Now you can see why this tank is good. And that's not even accounting for the DPM this thing can get with Hesh. Like, if you include this thing's Hesh DPM, base, it's 2.9k. You put a gun rammer on it, and, you know, even a base gun rammer on this thing, and you're getting this thing's DPM up to 3,300 with Hesh. You know, it is truly a monster. Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, I feel like people should... You know, people are aware of the tanks which have good HE, like the KPZ, the PTK. This thing, people seem to forget that it has Hesh. And I feel like this has the best Hesh ammunition. You know, arguably the PTK's is better. It's lower alpha, higher rate of fire. So I guess probably the PTK is the better Hesh TD. But this thing, having access to Hesh that hits for 480... every, you know, 8.5 seconds if you're using a gun rammer on it. Oh, it's so nice. Like, I've had so many scenarios where I just got behind tier 10 medium tanks and just went, guess I'll load Hesh. And, you know, well, obviously I was only firing Hesh myself, and you're just hitting them 480, you reload, 480, reload, 480. And before you know it, you're picking up 5k damage, 6k damage. Because... this tank scales the damage so quickly because it has that ridiculous DPM. Yeah, I don't know, honestly. Yeah, you don't have the HE pool. You don't have the armor, so, you know, you can't trade. This tank is very much relying on its, you know, stealth, which it does have. You know, I'd maybe even, you know, on a second setup, consider running low noise exhaust on this tank. Just to ensure that you can, you know, keep that gun... you know, firing, because that's what you have to do in this tank. Is you can't really afford to not have this thing firing. But, you know, honestly, it is brutal. Like, you know, as we're looking here, he's only got Hesh left, and Barasks are this thing's favorite thing to play against, because you just load Hesh and you're hitting them for 3 shots. You know, you are 3-shotting a Barask. You know, and not only that, Hesh does ridiculous amounts of crits. So the amount of times that you will set a tank... Look, you're firing Hesh at the side of an ISU on an angle, you're penning. The amount of times that you'll find yourself doing crits, like ridiculous amounts of crits, in this tank. It just does. Nice blind fire. But... I used this tank, actually, funnily enough, to do my missions for the 279E, the crit missions. I did the mission with honors with this tank, just because of the amount of crits that it can do. You know, I think I did like 12 crits in one game where I only did like 4k damage, because, you know, you're penning the engine decks, you're penning the sides of tanks, you're going to be taking out crew members, you're going to be taking out ammo racks, engines, fuel tanks... and all you need to do is set someone on fire, and you're picking up 4 or 5 crits a time. So, you know, if you are struggling with this mission, maybe give this tank a go. Because not only are you going to have fun whilst doing the mission, but you're also going to, you know, probably do the mission. And, you know, if you're looking for a tank to free mark, you know, maybe you've never free marked a tank, I'd recommend this tank, because its requirements for marking it are not very high. So it's not going to be the hardest mark ever. And once again, it's fun. And I feel like, yeah, it's not very, you know... if you make a mistake, you're going to get punished hard. But, you know, if you can get yourself into a scenario like this, on a map like this, where it is hard to make a mistake, you're just going to have games like this, and you'll have reliable games like this quite often. This tank is just truly... I know, it feels so comfy. It is just simply underrated, in my opinion. And I feel like, since we had the Charioteer and Nomad get released, as part of the June collaboration, I feel like people have started to realize that this tank is so good, but I don't know what the camera's doing there, doing something funky. I feel like people have started to realize that this tank is so good, but I know, I feel like it's still pretty underrated in my opinion. If the Charioteer Nomad does ever go on sale again, which it probably will do, we've seen those kind of collaboration tanks come back time and time again, and you're looking to just pick it up, because the Charioteer Nomad is this tank, but premium. It's exactly the same statistics, but premium. So not only are you going to be making credits in it, you're going to be, having a good time whilst making credits. This tank, I've seen some truly monstrous results in this tank in Frontline. This tank is a very good tank for Frontline, because Frontline is such a big map, but a lot of the time you're going to be fighting opponents, or you can choose to fight opponents side on. So you can be shooting the sides of opponents, you can be shooting the rear of opponents, and if you just fire Hesh, yeah, it's not the cheapest ammunition. I think it's costs 5,200 a shell, but you make it back. Especially if you've got the Charioteer Nomad, you're gonna make that back in a frontline game. It does also, I am discounting this thing does have just normal HE, normal high explosive, but in my opinion, it's not really worth firing, because it has the same amount of alpha as the Hesh, but significantly less penetration. There is, in my opinion, no point in even loading that shell. Just take more Hesh. Your lineup probably should be like, I don't know. This thing does have a lack of ammunition, so you'd have to bear in mind it only carries 30 shells. So probably 25 APCR, 5 Hesh, maybe 23 APCR, 7 Hesh. Something like that would do you well. And maybe have a second setup with slightly more APCR for a higher tier game, or you can maybe have a setup with 10 Hesh, 20 APCR for a lower tier game, like a tier 6 game like this, where you're going to be able to fire that Hesh more reliably and pen that Hesh more reliably. But honestly, this tank for me it's just so fun. I honestly, it's probably my funnest tier 8 tank that I've played ever, because I don't know, it just felt so reliable. And honestly, as I was saying, it is so funny just to pen the side of a tank that expects to hit them for 390. Get my words out. But you hit them for 500 because you high roll a 480 shell and you set them on fire, or you ammo rack them. It's really funny. And as you can see here, this tank is not slow. You can get around pretty nifty. Being able to drive the entire length of a map like Cliff in, 50 seconds is pretty good. Yeah, I don't know, honestly. I feel like if more people catch on that this tank is good and so underrated, we could see a lot more of them in the matchmaker, and Wargaming could maybe nerf it a little bit, but God knows. But let's go on to talking about equipment and field mods that I recommend for this tank. So, for equipment and field modifications. Firstly, for equipment for your first setup, I recommend you take vents, rammer, and improved aiming. And then once you've progressed through the field mods, for your second setup, I recommend you take vents, rammer, and optics. And then for the field modifications, firstly, I recommend you take reinforced suspension, which is the left-hand one. Secondly, parallax adjustment, which is the right-hand one. And finally, right-angled periscope, which is the right-hand one. So, what is my final opinion on this tank? Well, it's truly underrated, and if you're thinking about progressing up the line and don't really care about the FV405, maybe just get to the Charioteer and stay at the Charioteer, because this tank is pretty underrated, pretty good, and very, 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 very fun. And I feel like any player of any skill level will be able to extract decent games pretty regularly out of this tank. So, yeah, that's my opinions, and let's go into the outro of this video. So, that's it for today's video. If you did enjoy, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye!